The glow of my phone screen was the only light in my dark apartment. It was late, 3:07 a.m. to be exact. I had been mindlessly scrolling, trying to tire my brain enough to sleep, when the notification came. At first, I barely noticed it. Just another WhatsApp message. Then I saw the name. Daniel. My breath caught in my throat. My stomach twisted into a knot so tight it hurt. Daniel had been dead for a year. I sat up, my hands trembling as I unlocked my phone. Unread message from Daniel. That wasn't possible. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to just delete the chat, to forget I ever saw it. But my curiosity overpowered my fear. My finger hovered over the message, my pulse thudding in my ears. I tapped it. Ethan, I need you to watch this. Attached was a video file. The thumbnail was too dark to make anything out, just a blurry mess of shadows. The file name was a random string of numbers, almost like a timestamp, but something about it felt off, as if it wasn't just a simple recording. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. This had to be a prank. Some hacker? Some cruel joke? Maybe someone got access to his old number and was messing with me. I stared at the video. Then my phone buzzed again. Daniel is typing. A cold shiver crawled down my spine. My mouth went dry. My entire body felt paralyzed, my fingers stiff, unwilling to move. The typing indicator flickered for a few seconds. Then, suddenly, the message disappeared. The chat went blank except for the video file. I exhaled shakily, my grip on my phone tightening. I should just delete it. I should block the number and move on. And yet, I tapped the 3 dots in the corner, selecting View Contact. No profile picture. No status. The phone number was the same one Daniel had used when he was alive. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach. I backed out of the screen, ready to close the app, but the chat refreshed on its own. The same message appeared again. Word for word. Ethan, I need you to watch this. Another shiver. This time it didn't stop at my spine, it curled its way up to the base of my skull, sharp and painful. I deleted the chat. The second I did, my phone buzzed again. The message was back. Word for word. I watched in horror as the video file reappeared, unclicking itself from deletion. I turned off my phone and threw it onto the coffee table like it had burned me. My chest rose and fell in uneven breaths, heart pounding in my ears. No, this wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But deep inside I already knew the truth. This wasn't a hack. This was Daniel. And for some reason, he wanted me to see that video. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the fear. Or maybe, deep down, I already knew this wasn't just some random hack. With a shaky breath, I picked up my phone again. My thumb hovered over the video file. I hesitated. Then, against every survival instinct screaming inside me, I pressed play. The screen flickered to life. The footage was grainy, shaky. The kind of low-quality recording you'd expect from an old phone camera. For a moment, I thought it wasn't showing anything at all, just blackness. Then, slowly, an image came into focus. The camera was pointing at the ground. A pair of scuffed-up sneakers, soaked from the rain. Daniel's shoes. I felt a lump rise in my throat. My brother was holding the camera himself. Somewhere in the background, the soft sound of rainfall filled the speakers. But there was something else. Heavy breathing. Daniel's breaths were shallow, panicked. The way someone breathes when they're trying to stay quiet but failing miserably. And then, footsteps. Distant. Slow. Approaching. My grip tightened around the phone. Every muscle in my body was tense, rigid. The footsteps weren't Daniel's. He wasn't moving. But someone else was. The sound of twigs snapping underfoot sent a violent shudder through me. Whoever was out there with him, they weren't in a hurry. They were moving carefully. Deliberately. The camera shook violently. Daniel must have turned suddenly. The video became a chaotic blur of darkness and movement. And then, his voice. A whisper. Ethan, if you see this. A long pause. My heartbeat slammed against my ribs. He found me. The screen cut to black. A horrible, wet gurgling sound filled my ears, followed by a sickening, crunching noise. Something dull, wet, final. I dropped my phone. My breath came out in gasps, my skin covered in cold sweat. No. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. My body screamed for me to stop, to delete the file, throw away my phone, do anything but watch it again. But something didn't sit right. I reached for my phone with a trembling hand. Rewound the video. Pressed play. This time I watched closely. The shaky ground footage, the rain, the footsteps. Daniel's whisper. Then, in the final second, something changed. Daniel lifted the camera. Not much, just a little, just enough to show his own face. I stopped breathing. His eyes were missing. The sockets were empty, hollow, dripping with blackness. A silent scream built up inside me. Then, just before the screen cut to black again, Daniel's lips parted. And he whispered something I didn't hear the first time. A single word. Run. Chapter 3. The phone calls begin, 600 words. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Daniel's face, his hollowed-out eyes, his whispered warning, run, was burned into my mind like a brand. I sat on the couch, hands gripping my knees, my phone lying face down on the coffee table like a loaded gun. I told myself I wouldn't touch it again. Wouldn't even look at it. But at 3:07 a.m. the phone rang. My entire body seized up. The sound was deafening in the silence of my apartment. My breath came in short, uneven gasps as I reached for the phone, heart hammering against my ribs. I turned it over, and I felt my stomach drop. Caller ID, Daniel. The air turned thick, suffocating. My throat was dry as sand. This wasn't possible. My hands shook as I pressed the button to answer. I didn't even say hello, just listened. For a moment there was only silence. Then a whisper. Ethan, he's coming for you next. The voice was low, distant, distorted, like a radio frequency barely holding onto a signal. But underneath the crackling static, the voice was unmistakable. It was Daniel. I gasped and threw my phone across the room. It hit the floor with a hard thud, skidding under the coffee table. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. This isn't real. It's not real. But before I could catch my breath, the phone rang again. I stared in horror. The screen was glowing from under the table. Vibrating, buzzing like a heartbeat, flashing that impossible name again. Daniel. My limbs felt frozen. My mind screamed at me not to pick up, to get out, to run, but I couldn't move. The ringing stopped. And then, before I could even exhale, it started again. Daniel. I swallowed the lump in my throat and slowly, shakily crouched down. My trembling fingers wrapped around the phone. I pressed answer. Static. Then, a low, guttural chuckle. The breath left my lungs. It wasn't Daniel anymore. This voice was wrong. It was deep, slow, like rotting wood creaking in the wind. The laughter wasn't amused, it was hungry. I couldn't take it. I pressed end call. The apartment fell into an eerie silence. My body was drenched in sweat, my hands shaking violently. And then I saw it. In the reflection of my TV screen. A shadow. Standing in the hallway behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly fell over, but there was nothing there. Nothing. But I knew deep down something was watching. And Daniel's last words echoed in my skull like a drumbeat. He's coming for you next. I couldn't stay in that apartment any longer. The moment that shadow in the reflection appeared behind me, I knew I wasn't alone anymore. Something had attached itself to me. So I did what I should have done from the beginning. I grabbed my car keys and drove. There was only one person I could call. Lucas, Daniel's best friend. His last friend. We hadn't spoken much since Daniel's funeral. I had distanced myself from everyone after his death, retreating into my own grief. But now I need him. I pulled over at an all-night diner, hands shaking as I dialed his number. The phone rang once. Twice. Then a tired, groggy voice answered. Ethan? Man, it's 3 a.m. I exhaled, gripping the phone tighter. Lucas, I need to talk to you. It's about Daniel. Silence. Then a long sigh. What about him? I hesitated, then forced the words out. I got a message from his number. And a video. Lucas didn't say anything at first. Then he cursed under his breath. Ethan, listen to me, he said, his voice suddenly tense. Daniel was paranoid before he died. He kept saying crazy things. Weird things. My grip on the phone tightened. Like what? Lucas hesitated. He told me, if I disappear, don't believe it. He kept saying something was following him, watching him. A chill ran down my spine. That's exactly how I felt now. Lucas continued, a week before he died, he stopped answering my calls. The last time I saw him, he paused as if struggling for the right word, wrong. Well, like he hadn't slept in days. He was jumpy, looking over his shoulder like someone was after him. I swallowed hard. Someone was after him. And now they were after me. I needed to re-examine the video. I parked outside a gas station, leaving the car engine running. My fingers trembled as I unlocked my phone, playing Daniel's last recording again. The screen flickered. The rain. The footsteps. The breathing. Daniel whispering, Ethan, he found me. I forced myself to focus. Something felt off about the background. The first time I watched it, I assumed it was from the night Daniel crashed his car and died. But now, I wasn't so sure. The trees in the video weren't the same as the ones near the crash site. The surroundings were too open. There was no road, no streetlights. Where was he? I needed answers. I dug through the video's metadata, something I'd learned how to do from a true crime documentary. Every video file has hidden information: the time it was recorded, the camera settings, sometimes even GPS coordinates. My fingers worked quickly, decoding the raw data. And then, a location popped up. Coordinates. I copied them into Google Maps, my pulse pounding as the location loaded. The pin landed on a deserted warehouse, outside Seattle. Daniel had never been there. At least, not while he was alive. I stared at the map, my stomach twisting in knots. That warehouse held the answer. I had no choice. I had to go there. The warehouse was exactly how I imagined it, lifeless, cold, forgotten. The metal walls stretched up into the night like a rib cage around something dead. A single rusted sign barely clung to the entrance, its faded letters unreadable. I gripped my phone tightly, its screen still glowing with the coordinates. This was it. Daniel had been here. And if that message was real, he still was. The door wasn't locked. It groaned open, releasing a gust of stale air, thick with the scent of dust and rot. The interior was massive, stretching into darkness, filled with rusted shelves and abandoned machinery. My footsteps echoed, swallowed by the vast emptiness. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back. Then, I saw them, lining the walls. Dozens of missing person posters. Some were old and yellowed, barely clinging to the damp concrete. Others were newer, pristine. And right in the center, Daniel's face. I staggered back, my breath catching in my throat. His poster wasn't aged or tattered. It looked fresh, recently printed, and scrawled beneath his photo in thick red ink. Today. My stomach twisted into a knot. This wasn't possible. Daniel had been dead for months. Then, from deep inside the warehouse, a voice. Ethan? I nearly dropped my phone. The voice was wrong. It was Daniel's, but distorted, stretched, like it was being played from a broken speaker. I turned towards the sound. A corridor stretched ahead, long, narrow, pitch black. At the very end, something moved. I swallowed hard, my breath coming fast. My hands were clammy, my body frozen in place. The voice came again, softer this time. Ethan, come here. Every cell in my body screamed at me to run. But I couldn't. This was Daniel. If there was even the slightest chance he was alive, I had to know. Step by step, I moved forward, my phone's flashlight trembling in my grip. The deeper I went, the colder it got. Then, my beam landed on him. Daniel, standing completely still in the darkness. I felt the air squeeze out of my lungs. But something was wrong. His face, it was flickering, glitching, like a bad signal shifting in and out of focus. Daniel? My voice cracked. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there. Then, he smiled. A slow, painful stretch of his lips. You found me? And suddenly, the lights went out. The last thing I saw was his face splitting open. Then, darkness. The darkness swallowed me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My phone's flashlight had gone out, and the air around me felt thick, heavy, like something was pressing against my chest. I forced my breath to slow, my heart pounding so loud it echoed in my skull. Then a whisper. Ethan. It wasn't behind me. It was inside my head. I gritted my teeth, fighting against the suffocating blackness, my hands shaking as I pressed my phone's power button. Nothing. The battery was fully charged before I got here, but now, dead. A metallic clank echoed somewhere in the distance. My pulse spiked. Then footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. I clenched my fists, swallowing the lump in my throat. I wasn't alone. A dim, flickering light buzzed to life above me. And there he was. Daniel. Standing in the center of the room. But he looked wrong. His clothes were tattered, damp, clinging to his skin like they had been soaked in something. His eyes were sunken, and his skin had that same glitching effect, like he was a VHS tape struggling to play. He took a slow step forward. Ethan, he whispered. I never died in the car crash. My blood ran cold. He was lying. He had to be. I shook my head, my voice barely a whisper. That's not possible. I saw the wreck. I went to your funeral. His lips curled into a painful grin. You saw what it wanted you to see. The air grew colder. The flickering light above us dimmed, casting Daniel in an eerie half-shadow. He tilted his head. You don't get it, do you? His voice cracked as if it hurt to speak. Something took me, Ethan. Something that steals identities. A sharp static noise filled the warehouse. I flinched, covering my ears. It doesn't just take you. It erases you. Daniel's voice warped, shifting in pitch. 1 second his voice was too high, the next too low. Like something else was speaking through him. Your pictures? Gone. Your messages? Deleted. Your friends? They stop remembering you exist. One by one, everything that makes you real disappears. My stomach dropped. I took a step back, shaking my head. No, that's insane. This isn't happening. But Daniel just smiled, a hollow, empty smile. Look at your phone, Ethan. I hesitated, then slowly pulled it out. The screen flickered back to life. And then, all my messages were gone. Not just texts from Daniel, all of them. My group chats, my emails, my call history. Every single connection I had to the outside world. Erased. A sharp chill crept up my spine. I turned to Daniel, my voice trembling. This is impossible. He stepped closer, the air around him growing darker. It's happening to you too, Ethan. Just like it happened to me. I was spiraling. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. I turned towards a broken glass panel on the warehouse wall, desperate to ground myself in something real. And that's when I saw it. My reflection. It was standing still. I lifted my hand, it didn't move. I blinked, my breath catching in my throat. The reflection of myself wasn't me anymore. Its lips curled into a slow, knowing smile. I staggered backward. Daniel let out a shuddering breath. It's already started. The reflection tilted its head. And then, it took a step forward. Out of the glass. Daniel's form glitched violently, his face warping, shifting between agonized expressions like a corrupted video file. His lips trembled as if fighting to hold on to his own existence. Ethan? His voice was no longer just his. It was layered, multiple voices speaking through him, echoing through the warehouse. You need to run. Now. I couldn't move. My brain was screaming at me to leave, but my body was frozen. Daniel's eyes darkened, his pupils vanishing into an abyss of nothingness. His smile twisted into something inhuman. His head jerked violently to the side. And then, his voice became something else entirely. It's too late. A horrible static noise filled the air, the warehouse lights flashing like a dying signal. The walls shuddered, the very space around us bending. My phone vibrated violently in my hand. I looked down. A new message. It's your turn now. My breath caught in my throat. My hands shook as I clutched the phone, feeling a presence creeping behind me. A world around. Nothing. Just the darkness. I turned back to Daniel, but he was gone. My legs finally obeyed. I ran. I burst out of the warehouse, my breath ragged, my heart slamming against my ribs. The night air was thick, heavy, but I didn't care. I just needed to get out of here. I sprinted toward where I parked my car. But It wasn't there. I skidded to a stop, my pulse thundering. My hands flew to my head, my breath coming in ragged gasps. No car. No street lights. No city. The buildings were gone. The road was gone. Everything was gone. I was standing in the middle of an empty, endless void. And then, a presence. Behind me. I turned. And there I was. Another me. Standing just a few feet away. He was smiling. A calm, knowing smile. The way I smile in photos. He took a slow step forward. "Don't worry," he said, his voice identical to mine. "I'll take care of everything." I opened my mouth to scream, but the world blinked out.